Strengths and weaknesses for 2022, folks. One of the great things about the year coming to an end is you can have a look at every team, in this case Tier 1 test playing teams. You can have a look at their year that was in 2022 and kind of just go head-to-head comparison. Which team was great at offloading? Which team was great at getting run meters? Which team scored all the tries? Which team struggled? Which team coughed up lots of clean breaks? And all that kind of stuff. It's fascinating stuff for me. We are going to kind of go through this. We're calling it strengths and weaknesses. It's not always necessarily strengths and weaknesses. It could just be styles of play. Some teams don't offload, not because they are weak, but because maybe they choose to play things a bit safer, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, we're going to go through them, and you guys can let us know your thoughts. As I said, it is just the Tier 1 teams which have more stats available than some of the others, so apologise to our Tier 2 brothers and sisters. And I should say, Planet Rugby article is also available for this one, so if you want to check that in the description, have a read. There might be a few nuggets here which I don't mention here. But yeah, we are going to start with Ireland. Ireland finish the #1 side in the world, and looking at their stats, man, it's a stats dream. They're so good at just recycling that ball relentlessly fast. The most passes per game with 184. The Japanese love a pass, and they're second with 163. So 184 is crazy high. The most carries, the most clean breaks, the most territory, like more clean breaks than New Zealand, who are second, more carries than New Zealand, who are second. So, yeah, man, it's really hard to find much to fault the Irish with. I mean, their turnovers conceded is a little bit high because they have so many passes, but one of those ones where if you put the turnovers conceded in proportion to the number of passes, it's not that bad. But if you pass it 184 times a game, you're slightly more likely to drop it than someone who passes it 130. So, yeah, very, very, very relentless. It's the only word. No, there's other words, but relentless is my favourite one to describe the Irish. Anything really weak? I mean, they're a little bit old, if you wanted to go with something. They have the, I think it's the second oldest side that was fielded in 2022 at like 28 years old. And the oldest backline, if you want to divide it by backs and forwards. South Africa is a bit older overall. And Sexton's probably bumping the numbers up at the backline. Also Murray when he plays. But yeah, it's not like they don't have any of the younger guns playing as well. But yeah, man, Ireland, very, very kind of pleasant reading. Japan, I mentioned them with their passing game. Jamie Joseph loves to play a really, really attacking brand of rugby. And it's very clear. Japan maybe didn't get the results. And they only played a handful of games because they're not in a Six Nations, they're not in a rugby championship, so their results are more easily skewed by kind of one big result, you know what I mean? But still, I find them interesting. They got the lightest forward pack, which is, again, probably not really surprising to anyone, which is maybe why they play such a kind of high-tempo passing game. So 888 kilos, the lightest of the packs. The Italians are, what, 894, so a little bit heavier. The run meters, they're top. The top average run meter side with 477. Now, there's one game against France at home in Japan when they topped 600 odd, which again, because they only played like 5 or 6 games or whatever it was, really bumps up their average. So, for all you stats buffs out there, easy tiger. We'll take that into consideration. But yes, passing is always very high. Offloading is high. Run meters is high. Kicking is actually a bit higher than it was. They're kicking the ball a fair bit more, the Japanese, this year. What they're not doing is tackling that well. Lowest tackling percentage of all the Tier 1 teams at 83%. The most missed tackles a game, only England gets close. Japan missed 23 tackles a game, England 21. They also maul it the least, which is, again, probably goes with the fact that they got the lightest pack. So not mauling it probably seems kind of smart. So, yeah, there you go, Japan. Light, but deadly. Although they still lost all their Tier 1 games. Who else have we got? The Scots. The Scots are an interesting one because they don't really have any out-and-out, we are the worst at this category, which is probably pretty pleasing if you're a Scottish fan. But they do have a couple of categories where they do really well. Defenders beaten, it's Scotland, #1. And I think you've got 2 men mainly to thank for that, and that's Darcy Graham and Duan van der Merwe. Those guys broke tackles for fun, so 24.3 tackles broken a game. The Scots are first, and their tackling percentage is 91, higher than anyone else. Tackling percentage you do sometimes have to take with a bit of consideration, because some tries are scored without having to even attempt a tackle. Sometimes a guy gets a clean break. There was no tackle, and no tackle missed. The try is still scored. Sometimes a maul try happens. No tackle is missed. The try is scored. So Scotland, despite the highest tackle percentage, conceded more points than some other sides, but that is still a pleasing stat. The fact that if you're attempting a tackle and you're making it, it can't be a bad thing. And the only kind of, I guess, one that's a little bit negative is they tend to have a fair few run meters conceded, like just behind Italy. So teams can get some good go-forward ball against the Scots, and behind France as well. But France, I think, is maybe for a slightly different reason. But yeah, the Scots have teams run at them a fair bit. But the Scots got ball in hand. Very, very exciting team to watch. The Argentinians, as we go back down to the Southern Hemisphere, they don't get all that much ball compared to some of the... I mean, they're in the Rugby Championship with the All Blacks, South Africa and Australia, so usually Argentina are the wooden spoon team, so their stats kind of suffer a wee bit. So they don't have like the most run meters or clean breaks or defenders beaten. But one thing they have proved this year is they can beat you with the boot. They came to New Zealand and got a victory pretty much off the boot of that man, Emiliano Boffelli. The best goal-kicking game in the Tier 1 teams in 2022, 87%. The other teams were averaging like 80. Some of the teams, like 5 of the teams, didn't even make 80%. So going into a World Cup, man, having a good set piece and a good goal kicker could be the difference between a pool exit and a knockout game. The Aussies weren't too far behind at 84%, but yeah, 87. Boffelli's been kicking like a real legend. But run meters, like I said, no ball. They get 300 and less than 320 odd meters a game. The Welsh are 315, so the Welsh are a step worse, but you don't really want to be comparing yourself to the 2022 Wales side to make yourself feel better. So they're a bit behind Italy, who averaged 355. Keeping in mind Italy played a bunch of Tier 2 teams, which Argentina did not. But yeah, great goal kicking, the Argentinians. Speaking of the Italians, though, young squad, really, really young squad, averaging 25 years old. And a lot of those key guys are around about that 25, 24, 26 mark. You know, Lamaro, Garbisi, and a bunch of other guys. Yeah, really quite young players, which is pretty Capozzo, obviously. Really bodes well, I think, for Italian rugby. So the youngest squad, the French are the closest, they're about a year older. But also they like scoring tries through their backs, more so than any other side this year. Obviously the Italians didn't score as many tries. They played a bunch of Tier 2 teams, which is where they scored a lot of their tries. But like almost 80% of their tries came from their backs this year, which is the most lopsided we've had in terms of being favourable for the backs this year. Negative things for the Italians, obviously. They concede like 6.4 clean breaks a game, which is the most of any of the teams. Like Japan's 5.6, who are the next worst in that regard in comparison. So 6.4, quite a lot. And I think it's even higher if you just isolate the numbers against Tier 1 opponents only. So yeah, when the defense goes wrong for Italy, it really, really goes, I would call it catastrophically wrong. So yeah, they ended up shipping quite a few points in that regard. But yeah, young side. And I think still plenty to look forward to. The Aussies are a bit of a mixed bag. There's quite a few categories where the Aussies didn't really do that well. Main area for Australia is discipline, and they've been talking about it pretty much literally all year. 14 penalties conceded a game is just too high, man, and an average of a yellow card a game. You're putting yourself in a really difficult position when you're getting the whistle blowing at you that much. So I feel like if there's one area they can clean up and it will have a massive difference on the side, I do feel like it's the discipline for the Aussies. But that and stop getting injured, but I'm not sure how much they can control that. But the fact they've been talking about discipline literally all year and it didn't get any better is concerning. Like, how many times do you talk about it and nothing changes before you start to ask some pretty serious questions? So discipline, a big issue for the Aussies. It's not a category they want to top, but they are the best Southern Hemisphere side for winning turnovers. They're only behind the French overall, so that's an impressive thing for them. They've got some pretty good open side flankers and like as a Hooper and McCright to threat the breakdown. Samu as well. I kind of wish they would maul it a bit more. We've seen the Aussies get some pretty good maul tries, but I think they maul it like only more than Japan, which is kind of a little bit surprising. But yeah, there you go. That's where the Aussies are at. Wales, sadly Wales, it's been a pretty tough year. Your coach has been sacked, and I mean, looking at the numbers, you're scoring the least average tries with 1.9. I think if we isolate the Italians to their Tier 1 games only, then the Italians are lower than Wales. But yeah, overall, it's the Welsh if you include every opponent that everybody's played. The least run meters per carry, with 3 run meters a carry, which tends to be an indication of how well you're getting forward. The least clean breaks. Yeah, man, just attack. The Welsh attack's been blunt, really, really blunt, which is disappointing. So at least that's, I think, job number 1 for Gets to try and get a bit of spark. I mean, they make the most tackles of anyone else with 151 tackles a game, and they're at 90%, which is great. But like I said, tackling percentage ain't everything, and often if you're making that many tackles, it's because you're defending a lot. Like, guess who's number 2? Italy, with 147. So, yeah, tough year for Wales to try and find really kind of pretty reading in terms of the numbers there. For New Zealand, though, the stereotype rings true. The All Blacks like to score tries more than anybody else, 4.2 tries a game. And this is not a year where we're talking games against Fiji and Tonga, where USA, where the All Blacks are putting 100 kind of or 50 points on every game. So 4.2 tries a game is still pretty solid. A lot of tries from kicks as well, more so than anybody else. I think 7 of the All Blacks tries this year came directly from like a cross kick or some other kick like that. So yeah, they do like to vary it up a wee bit on attack. I think none of the other teams managed an average of 4 tries a game. So that's a bit of a feather in the old cap of Ian Foster. But the line out struggled. 85% is the second worst. They're equal with Japan. And remember, Japan tends to be a side that at set piece time, they just want to get it done fast. They don't want to be spending ages necessarily competing in that area. So the fact the All Blacks line out is the same as Japan's is not really a good thing, but they are ahead of the Wallabies for what that's worth. So yeah, 85%. You'd like to be a bit higher. Some of the sides are in the 90s. So yes, I'm pleased to see the ruck numbers went up. Like last year, the All Blacks were really soft at ruck time. Those numbers have improved, which is at least a little bit pleasing. France, like Ireland, have got some really, really, really nice numbers. Interestingly, though, the one thing you don't necessarily think with France is all the kicking. 31 kicks a game that takes the place of South Africa, who were the big kicking team in 2021. So it is France this year. They're very happy to play without the ball. Very, very happy to hit you on the counter. So they win the most turnovers, which is kind of unsurprising for a team which likes to kick the ball back to teams. And real stingy on defense. Real stingy. Fewest clean breaks conceded of any of the teams. 2.7 clean breaks conceded a game. They're really a hard team to break down. They got the best line out at 92%, so really, really, really reliable side. They're just ahead of Ireland, who's at 91. So I don't think you can underestimate how important it is to win your own ball. Those sides prove pretty good at it. Interestingly, where they are the kind of worst side is run meters conceded. 466 run meters conceded a game. They're only close to Italy, who's at 455. So again, it goes hand in hand with the French not wanting necessarily to play with the ball. And it also doesn't really matter if you don't concede the points, right? As long as you don't concede the points, then if you cough up the run meters, it don't really matter. But yeah, it's just an interesting one. You see the top team for coughing up run meters or conceding run meters. It was France. So yeah, England. Not England's best year as well when they had their coach sacked. They didn't really get, a bit like Wales in terms of their attack. It's not been that sharp. You look at some of those English players and you think, why didn't England score more tries? Well, maybe part of it's because they were going for penalties. They scored more penalty goals than anybody else this season. I think they had like 39. They averaged more than 3 penalties kicked per game, which is slightly ahead of the French. So that's maybe a tactic. Again, going into a World Cup. World Cups are often not won on tries, but they are won just by getting those pure points on the board. So whether the new coach decides to shift that approach is one to watch. Their scrum, though, remember they've got a few kind of veteran, shall we call it, front rowers and some up-and-coming young guys as well. Whether they shift roles going forward is one, again, for the new coach to have a look at. But 69% is the scrum stat, which is like the scrum completion stat on own ball. I don't take the scrum completion stats in that much high regard because I don't think they're that accurate. Like, I think the Italians had the best scrum stats from what I looked at, but England's were far and away the lowest. So if it's that far an exception, it starts to make you think there might be something to that, eh? So yeah, England's scrum stats, not flash. And with set piece being what it is, you would think at World Cup time, probably pretty important. And lastly, South Africa. South Africa not kicking it as much like I mentioned, but they certainly love a maul. 8.5 mauls a game, just ahead of Ireland who are on 7. So that big forward pack's getting into action. And when I say the big forward pack, I'm talking literally the biggest forward pack. 933 kilos, the average weight for the Springboks pack this year. Only ever so marginally ahead of the All Blacks. It's almost the same, but the South Africans still claim the #1 spot by like 100 grams or something like that. So yeah, slightly heavier. Big pack is the Springbok one. And interestingly, the most possession on average at 54%, but the fewest passes. The Springboks just don't pass the ball. Very direct, which is, again, maybe not a weakness as much as it is a strategy. At times, you might call it a weakness when you see the Springboks get an overlap and you're like, bro, don't kick it, pass it. But yeah, they certainly kick and run more than they do pass, which is not necessarily by pure numbers, but you know what I mean by decision-making options. So yeah, those are the Tier 1 teams. I think I covered everybody. I hope I didn't miss anybody out. You guys let us know your thoughts. As I said, check out the article down below. Take the stats, as always, with a little bit of a grain of salt, but I do think some of the stuff we've seen with our eyeballs is reflected in the numbers. But anyway, you guys let us know your thoughts. Where do you think your team needs to improve for 2023? Where do you think the World Cup is going to be won and lost? And is it the traditional values of good set piece, good ruck, good goal kicking? Or do you think there's going to be a bit of flash? The offloading game is going to be important. You guys let us know your thoughts. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.